All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. This is a Kiss-related podcast by the board for the board. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to episode 67 of the KissFAQ podcast. I'm Julian Gill, one of your hosts, the admin on the KissFAQ message board. Joining me today, the panel consists of Alex, BagBoy. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ken, 69th Blizzard. Always good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
And Marcus Almighty from the Great White North.
Hello.
Mark. So, guys, we were talking about this topic a little bit, and 1979, 1980. It's kind of a weird period in history, and no one's allowed to talk about the Elder on this show today. For me, it's a weird time for the band. I mean, obviously, getting into them after that, I didn't have to experience what was essentially them going Vegas. I didn't have to open up a magazine in 1979 and see Peter Criss with green fluffy things as his costume, Gene with, well, what looks like an erector set holding up his cape sometimes, and Paul wearing, well, what was that? And Ace. It's pretty weird. It's Vegas. It's odd. But when you get to the music's straightforward, not disco album for Dynasty, whereas Paul would love to say Dynasty. So it's a weird thing. Ken, this was your idea, so what are you kind of thinking on 79-80, other than it's a weird period?
Well, other than it's a weird period is probably the oversaturation of Kiss and merchandising, which led them down a road that people started seeing them as not dangerous anymore, and starting to go, like you said, Vegas, the costumes, they hired a new designer, I believe, costume designer, and they used, the colors from the solo albums and that sort of thing and blended those in. Plus the music, was changing too. Of course, they're trying to change and maybe follow the trends. For the first time, I think they're following rather than leading, as they did maybe, the last album was Love Gun, really. And if you count, side 4 of Alive 2, they were rocking it out and still doing their own thing. And then all of a sudden, here comes, we're going to write a disco song. And even though the rest of Dynasty is technically, it's rock. It's, semi-hard rock, I would say. And it was, well-written songs, and they were trying to write songs that would be hits on the radio at this point. So they're trying to write hits. They're putting out, the Dolls, the Lunch Boxes, anything and everything. And it just kind of, I think, turned a lot of fans, away, original or early fans that got started with them either Alive or before Alive.
Yeah, 1979. Look, you've got Highway to Hell. You've got Killing Machine, or whatever that was called in whichever country you're from. It has 2 titles. You've got a lot of harder music coming out, and then there's Peter's green little fluffy tassels. So you go from Love Gun and Rocket Rides to Save Your Love. It's kind of taking it down. Alex, from the Village People perspective and those costumes.
Hey, I mean, you had 1980s Can't Stop the Music with all the sequence and stuff too. But actually, it's funny. There was an interview with David Hodo, and he hated all the glitter. But no, as a kid, seeing the clip of showing us something that was on the Extreme Close-Up video that Kiss had, and so I remember thinking like that was really cool. And so I guess for me as a kid growing up, one of my first bootleg concert videos was the Largo 1979 show. And living in Maryland, having been to the Capitol Center before it was torn down, it was kind of cool to like, hey, I've been here and stuff, and to see the full stuff. So the album, I love the Dynasty album. It was one of the first ones I picked up on CD. Charisma's kind of a weird song. Actually, Gene's songs are just kind of weird on that whole album. That and X-Ray Eyes. But then, like, Magic Touch is excellent. And, of course, you know, when Paul did it live in 2006, you know, he definitely did a nice, beefier version of the song. So, you know, I think there was potential. I mean, obviously, they were trying to do that whole commercial success, and they had already, like, plateaued at that point, you know, the end of 77, kind of 78, with the merchandise and everything. And so it was either they were going to have continued success or the ship was going to start to sink. And I think, you know, we saw the ship kind of starting to sink just a little bit at that point.
And there was a recession in 1979. There's a good issue of Billboard that's got an article on Kiss. Kiss bucks the trend and is going out on tour with their mammoth set, and you've got Paul, I believe it was anyway, you know, saying, we don't care, we're going to take the fun out on the road, you know, because we know it's a downtime or something to that effect. You know, check it out online. Google Books has tons of, you know, issues of Billboard. It's a great source for you to go, and you can waste many hours digging those up. But it was kind of like in your face that we're going to go out on the road no matter what. We're going to take the biggest show. I mean, millions of dollars that it cost to develop that stage show for the return of Kiss. And it's also kind of weird that it was the return of Kiss and when they'd never really gone away. Mark, what's your take on, you know, Dynasty as such, you know, whether it's the album, whether it's the costumes, whatever?
Well, I always thought it was a really sort of interesting time. I mean, they did have quite a lot of merch come out, like Ken mentioned there earlier. And I think because of the amount of merch that came out, they started attracting a slightly younger audience base than they had beforehand, which there in turn made their image switch from being the, you know, the kind of cool and, you know, dangerous band to being, you know, the band that everybody in your whole family can go see, you know. And that was a risk because on one hand, if it worked properly, they would have quadrupled their sales, which I think at one point they obviously did at one point. But in doing that, they hindered a lot of their original audience, people that would probably go away and never come back again, maybe ever. But, you know, the tour was interesting and the time period was interesting too. Chris Lent's book has a really great bunch of chapters on that whole time period when they were also thinking of doing that whole Kiss World thing, which would have probably totally killed them at that point. Because not only did the tour not do so well, because, I mean, you could blame it on whatever, the recession at the time, or maybe just people weren't buying it at the time, or they just were starting to lose confidence in them because of the whole merch thing. Who knows why? But there were many reasons that could be pointed at it. But, you know, that tour was interesting. I mean, that book really put an interesting light on it. I mean, they were asked to maybe do a B show and, you know, do an A and a B show to kind of, you know, help make some more money on the tour, which obviously shows that it wasn't doing as good as, you know, they wanted people to believe, obviously. But, you know, the costumes I thought were rather outlandish there. But, you know, I think it was just them just trying to, you know, move forward a bit. I mean, I kind of thought that the whole Ace's guitar there for New York Groove was kind of neat with the flashing lights and that. Mm-hmm. So some of the things were some interesting improvements. I mean, the Gene flying rig was introduced during this tour and has stayed with them ever since then. So there's another innovation that happened then that's stuck with the band, right? So it wasn't all bad, but, you know, I don't know what they were thinking with some of those costumes. I mean, it just looked like Gene's costume was made out of like soldering iron, that whole thing on his chest there.
Right.
It looked horrendous. And the boots, they weren't even dragon boots. They were just like, I don't know, these teeth just sticking out of his feet there all of a sudden. It was really odd looking. But I don't know. I mean, it was just really strange, that whole costume period that they had. I mean, it was really Vegas on steroids almost, you know?
Icecapades is one of the phrases that I've seen. And,
right.
and you brought up Chris Lent's book, and Kiss and Sal. I mean, that's just an incredible. I mean, it really is the top of the Kiss books, you know, because of the details that he gives you about this tour. I mean, they're trying to do multiple stands in cities as another cost cutting. They knew they had the kind of the limitations, but one thing you said, Mark, is that they were safe. Mm-hmm. Would it be fair to argue that they'd been safe since 1976, really, when they'd done Destroyer? That had been a totally safe album. It had changed them dynamically, completely from the dangerous rock and roll. Ken, you look like you're about to jump on me on that one. Like,
Yeah,
you're
I don't
wrong.
think so.
Englishman.
I don't think so. They weren't being safe. I mean, the music was a little different, and they're more of a concept type album. But I don't think that's being. I think that was a risky thing for them to do, is to do the Destroyer album. Quite honestly, and really, what it is what happened after Destroyer, or in the contract. I guess when they redid their contract, they had to do the solo albums. That was put in there to do a certain amount of albums. I think that contract is what blew a lot of what came after, having to do those solo albums and doing them. I think if they didn't have that in their contract to do the solo albums, and they didn't do the solo albums, Dynasty, you wouldn't have seen a Dynasty Unmasked or The Elder, in my opinion. I think you would have had a harder rockin' album coming after Alive 2, and after Love Gun. So I think that contract is part of the problem of why they went and changed their at least the sound. Now maybe the merchandising and things would have still happened the same way. Maybe even the costumes, but I think the music would have been still more on the harder rock side.
Yeah, and that contract, with doing the Gene Ace Peter and Paul, or Paul and Peter Buck, whatever it is, it was about money, because they got 4 times the advances off that with it written in. So it was kind of a given that when they wrote that in, it was like, well, here's easy money. And I kind of say in the book, and whenever I talk about it, that Glickman, Marx, and the whole Kiss business became so money hungry that the amount of advances that they could squeeze out of Casablanca was, whether it was for the advertising budget that was going to go to Glickman, whether it was the money that was going to go to Aucoin, it was just such a massive amount of monies that they were able to hit the label for, that it was like just too easy. So yeah, that's the part that really starts changing the band, because then you get them back together in '79, and Peter is kind of the elephant in the room now, isn't he? Because he doesn't even play on the album. But can anyone actually tell? Does anyone actually say, well that's not Peter? Because I don't have the musical ear for that.
Well, I
did not know.
I think it's easy to, for me, it's kind of easy to pick it up now. When I first started getting into Kiss, there was no way in hell that I would have known that, because number one, when I started getting into Kiss, I was about 11, 12, so I hadn't even started playing guitar at that point, so there's no way I would have picked up on stuff like that. It's only after you've been doing music and doing production and stuff like that, and have years and years and years of doing it, that you start picking up on these kinds of things, or even becoming aware of things like that, right? Because I'd only become aware of like ghost sessions and stuff like that, like 10 years ago or whatever. Like when I was in a studio, people started talking to me about that, and I had no clue what they were talking about, and hence you learn about it and you learn about stuff like that. But I would have never have known that at that point, right? But I mean, I think the whole point that you brought up about the Destroyers thing, I have to agree with Ken, actually. I think that was a major risk that they took doing that, because up to that point, they had done nothing but straight ahead rock. People were claiming to like it, and when Alive came, they showed how much they truly loved that whole music, especially in a live capacity. And then their own reaction kind of shows what they thought of it themselves. I mean, they went quickly back in and did Rock and Roll Over, and went completely back to what they did before, because they were scared of the reaction to it. I mean, them alone, they were afraid of it, right? But nowadays when you go to see a show, it's funny how much of that record they actually play live. They played probably almost most of that record in a live sense for most of the time. So it's interesting how something like that can change. I mean, with time, things change in people's eyes sometimes, right? A record that you may not have liked 10 years ago, you listen to it again sometime, and then all of a sudden it grows on you, right?
So do fans have a problem with this album or this era because of the kids or because of the image? Because it's not really the music, is it? No. Alex?
Yeah, I think it's a combination here. I mean, you've heard stuff where people mention the kids. I think some of it is a lot of the music. I can see that. I've got friends that are huge Taylor Swift fans. and some of them love like the new stuff that comes out, and some of them it's like, oh, it doesn't sound like the old stuff, and they don't like it. And I think you can see that with any other band that people listen to. You can look at like the '80s band Y&T, and they had like the heavy stuff with Black Tiger, Mean Streak, and Rock We Trust, and then you get Down for the Count, which is full of keyboards and synths, and people are like, I don't like this. And so I think it was a combination of everything. Kind of doing some, studies, because I love the 70s, 80s music era. The 80s was this kind of huge thing coming about and stuff too. The end of 79, you had the end of disco and so forth. And I think that did play a huge role with some of the views, with how people looked at Kiss at that time, because there's no doubt that Dynasty had a very pop influence to it. With the music, rock disco, as Ace calls it in that interview for Veronica's Countdown, whatever you want to call it, there was definitely a pop influence. And of course, you had the big thing where they burned all the disco records, and then you saw the decline of disco. And I think because of the bright colors and stuff of the outfits, and that whole demise of disco, I think it did play a factor with it. Maybe not as huge as one might think, but it definitely did play a role in it. Sorry, that was long-winded.
That was a hell of a monologue, but very very concise. So, does Vinny Poncia, or Poncia, however you want to say it, I mean, he comes in, but yet, I find the sound of the album pretty soft. It's not exactly very dynamic in terms of being aggressive. It doesn't sound like Rock and Roll Over. It sounds more like Love Gun to me. And Love Gun's a pretty sonically neutered album. That's my one big criticism about Love Gun, is that it is not aggressive. There's no roughness to it. It's very polished. So that's the best way I can describe it.
And it's weird in a way, at least for me. I mean, obviously you had Peter's and Jane's solo albums that were a little bit different. But you look at Ace and Paul's, except for Hold Me, Touch Me, that Paul did on his at the piano. But you look at all the other tracks on Paul's album, and you look at Ace's solo album, and there was so much crunch to it, and you kind of go like, where did it go? I mean, obviously you still got some strong, stuff with Ace's Dynasty material, but at the same time, it's like, where did the aggression go?
True,
yeah.
And it bringing in Vinny to cater to every Peter Criss on this is part of the problem. Maybe if they would have went back to Eddie Kramer, they would have had that, and they probably would have had more of maybe sounding like Ace's album, if anything.
Yeah, that's the part that's like so disappointing, that Dynasty doesn't really represent the best of any of the solo albums being brought back to the Kiss world, does it? Mark, I jumped in on you there.
That's okay. I was just going to say, the one thing I noticed about Dynasty, and I think I mentioned this once before, is that I don't know what it is, and if I'm the only one who thinks this, but every time I listen to Dynasty, and it's probably one of the records I actually surprisingly pull out more than some of the others, is that I've always found that when I listen to it, it reminds me of New York City. And I'll try to explain that. It's just whenever I hear that record, I just can envision downtown New York for some reason. And there's a few records that do that to me as well. Like there's a few Zappa records that when I listen to, it reminds me of New York. And there's like that Asia record from Steely Dan. Whenever I hear that, there's songs in that record that remind me of New York City. There's something about the way they produced the songs on the way they used compression and stuff like that, that's tagged along all those records I just mentioned, that has a very downtown New York City sound to it. I mean, I know it might be difficult to kind of translate what I'm hearing in it, but there's something about it that's always made me just think of New York. Like I just see Statue of Liberty. I don't know what it is about that record that just makes me hear and see. When I see that, like when I hear, I see those things, right? And I've never had a problem with that production. I thought that Unmasked was a little bit more on that bad side of the whole poppy side. But, I guess it's just also you got to keep in mind that Vinny Poncia, that's his style of production and that's his style of, work that he would normally does. I'm thinking in terms of making audio, right? So, I mean, if they would have had somebody else do it, like if Eddie Kramer would have did that record with them, or if anybody else would have did it with them, I'm sure there would have been a slightly different tonality to it, right? But I just think it has to do with Vinny's production sense, and I just think that also them recording it in New York had a bit of an influence to it that way too. I just like Dirty Living to me just sounds like a theme for like New York cabbies or something. I can just envision that,
I totally agree with you there.
No.
Yeah.
And I totally get that, Mark. I have the same. If you guys get the chance, check out the song "Street Player" by Chicago, and you can envision like that New York City scene, that's life and everything. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
No, that's a great take on it, but I don't think Eddie Kramer could make that album sound any different. Again, it just sounds like a redo of '77 sonically.
Yeah, if you think about it, they wrote the songs a certain way. Those songs were written a certain way, and I don't think they were changed that much by Vinny Pontia's input. I think the basic bones of those songs are still going to be pretty much the same.
But I mean, you could
Go
hear
ahead.
kind of, I guess, the layers that were added. I mean, if you ever guys, YouTube the Dirty Living demo,
Yeah.
and I mean, it's still nothing, it's still poppy as it is, but it definitely had a little bit more crunchy sound to it compared to the finished product that did wind up on Dynasty.
Oh,
Yeah,
God,
Dirty Living was a song that they had written back in like around '72 or something, I believe.
completely.
With Pendridge, right?
Yep.
So
I love
yeah.
that demo, and that's off the reel I had, and you just gave me a happy moment, recalling listening to the playback of that after we'd had that reel restored, respliced, everything cleaned, and playing it in the studio on studio equipment. Unbelievable. And then it's just such a different character to the song. I love Peter's original take on that, and the stuff that he brought in to Dynasty has always been a particular favorite for my taste. Out of Control, Rumble's crap, but it just needs a little bit of help from another co-writer to get it there, because it's got a vibe that's not that much different from Dirty Living. So. And then what's the last one? There's Nothing Better or something like that. So, Out of Control.
Another quick thing about this era too is I think their hunger was gone. They were really hungry. When they first started off, but now that they've made it, that hunger is gone, and you could see it in their writing. I mean, they weren't that dangerous even writing. Their theme of music and what they wrote about was toned down quite a bit. They kind of went on. I guess they were just coasting at this point, I think.
Yeah, there's a big change when you look at like a song like Charisma, and then compare it to Do You Love Me? They're kind of similar in terms of where the song's kind of pointing, but you're like getting a little bit more arrogant and egocentric when you get into Charisma, that you're now everyone else are the little people. I mean, but how do you stay hungry when the checks start running in? You start getting these big checks finally.
Yeah, everyone says yes to you.
You've got your faces on dolls. You're on your way to having 300,000 licensees or whatever.
Right.
How do you stay hungry? How do you stay angry? Angry rock stars. When you're driving a Porsche, or you've got an apartment, in a swanky part of New York or wherever they were living at this point. Mark?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, that's exactly the whole point of it. I think that the reason why they weren't hungry is because there was no reason for them to be hungry anymore. They had money coming in before they were, Gene was sleeping sometimes in the loft or this and that, or, they didn't have money. They were driving cabs, and, life they thought sucked at that point. But now they have everything they want. They have nice houses. They have, brownstones and, rooftop apartments. And, like Julian said, I mean, how could you be hungry when you have stuff like that? And you're literally not hungry anymore. You can go out and have steak dinners every night if you wanted. I think the problem is whenever I look at bands that have went on and continued after they got to success, they always try to find another motivator for them to continue it. I remember when Pink Floyd hit big with Dark Side of the Moon, they were saying, what are we in it for now? You know what I mean? Like, why are we doing this? We've done all the things that we were striving for. Why do we continue? And they had issues with Wish You Were Here because of that, because, you know, everybody was just here, there, and everywhere. And I mean, I look at bands like Rush too, like when they hit big with Moving Pictures, what was their motivation now to move forward? And, you know, they always tried, I always found it interesting that whenever I read their books that they just tried so many different things. Like Neil would look into, you know, bike riding, or he would do all these different things that would inspire him to write lyrics and stuff like that, and that kept it fresh and kept it moving. And I think maybe Kiss were victim of not doing that, keeping themselves stimulated with new things that their fortune could have gave them. You know, like maybe if Paul got into, I don't know, rock climbing or something, that maybe he would have got inspired by the views, or, you know, who knows, like just something that would have got their engine flowing that they could have translated to their music.
You're not going to get very inspired when you're buying antique lamps. Is that what we're saying? And Pink Floyd, I mean, look at them. By the time they're recording The Wall, they're basically coming to the studio with attaché cases and working 9 to 5 like freaking bankers. So, yeah. But obviously that's a different kind of case. No pun intended there, but. You know, that it had become a business, and they were so dysfunctional by the time they're doing that album anyway that it doesn't really matter. Kiss, I mean, isn't it a little bit cliched where they went? You know, you've got the two guys who go off the wall, and then you've got one who goes Hollywood and one who goes arty. Mm-hmm. Alex, you had a comment that you were trying to get in with a minute ago.
Oh, I can't even remember what it was now, but it must not have been that good. No, but I agree. You know, it's interesting to see, I guess, where the mindset was for the members too, and obviously with what they were writing about, and it truly is. You know, you write what you're living and what you know, and you can definitely see the changes that were coming. And I think even like on Unmasked, you see that with Gene's song "Naked City" on Unmasked and stuff. You know, you go from the, you know, obviously the early albums being, you know, sex and alcohol and rock and roll, and then, you know, you kind of move up a little more. With more the intimate side of things with some of the guys, and then you get like Unmasked, you got, you know, Ace with Torpedo Girl, which is just a weird song. It's got a cool bass riff. I love it. It's got a great bass riff. I still remember when I saw Ace in 2008, and Anthony Esposito started playing that riff, and I was like, no freaking way are they doing, you know, this song. So it was way cool, but still, it was a different song to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, as a musician, as someone who's worked as a musician, do you have to be suffering to write good, angry, or edgy music? You know, let's not necessarily say angry, but edgy, something with a message. Do you have to be? Or if you're so content, is it going to be country music?
Well, honestly, and, you know, I'm going to come clean with a few things by me talking about this on my end, but I think that certain things motivate certain songwriting. Like when I first started some of my bands like that I was in, it was just all about hunger and desperation to want to get out and start playing and to start touring and to get into the whole scene of the music thing. So to be inspired then was really easy. Once we started getting out there and doing things and, you know, started doing tours of Canada and this and that and things like that, then, you know, it's not like, you know, we ever hit some huge big time, but it's, you start having different things now starting to creep in to motivate you, right? Or sometimes things that deter you from doing it. Like I found sometimes at one point in our band's career, we started getting heavy into drinking a bit, right? Now, when we drank sometimes we found that some of the songs that we wrote were pretty good and sometimes they were pretty terrible. And to be honest, there was a small little period of my life where that also happened with narcotics, unfortunately, for me too. Now, I'm not going to say that, you know, I encourage people to do that, but I even remember Steven Tyler saying that he thought some of the best songs he ever wrote in his life was while he was high. And I have to say that there has been a few songs that I've written in my life that I thought I wrote that were awesome, and because of that situation that I was in. But I have to also say that I do, because I've went through this and have been clean and I don't drink, I don't do anything anymore. I haven't done it for like 10 years now. But because of that though, and having gone through it, I can say that it does motivate you in certain ways because of the change of mindset. You can think of different things and different ideas, and sometimes you come up with an idea that you never would have thought that you would have came up with, not in that situation. And I mean, I think that's obvious with lots of those bands too. I mean, Floyd have experimented and done stuff. The Beatles have done that. You know, Rush for a long time, they're all about pot smoking and stuff like that. So I mean, it's you know, I'm not encouraging it or like advertising it, but I understand because I've been in that path too, to see what it does. And, you know, that's the one thing I thought it was always interesting about Kiss, for example, is that, you know, those guys had their issues as well, you know, and it seemed like with Ace, sometimes it almost seemed like it maybe might have helped him. He wrote some great songs, you know, Rocket Ride and stuff like that. But, you know, with Peter, it always seemed like there was something odd going on with his songwriting. Now, whether that had anything to do with, you know, his intake or not, only he could truthfully tell us that. But, you know, I always thought it was, you know, strange, that dynamic, you know.
Well, I said we weren't going to talk about The Elder, but unfortunately, when we're talking about substances, you get Destroyer, where Bob Ezrin is known to be using at that time, and it has a positive influence on the creativity, or at least, shall we, you know, play devil's advocate and say it doesn't have a negative impact on the creativity. And you have Peter Criss, who's using it, and it's fueling an incredible energy that he's bringing into his drum work, and, you know, he's maybe coping with the stress of boot camp in a way. And then you fast forward to 1981, and he's using, and it's having a delusional effect, maybe, a less than positive one. So, you know, without getting into the psychology of, you know, use and all of the stuff that goes with that are way out of my realm of expertise, you know, there are differences as to how a substance could have a benefit and could have a negative reaction. But, you know, by this time, you know, when we're talking about Dynasty, it seems that drug abuse has taken its toll on the creativity, that, you know, they're not angry, they're not motivated, they're not really singing about much. It's pretty standard fare, the material on Dynasty, I find.
Yeah, they seem tired. It almost seems like they're doing it at that point just to keep going, almost like at like Elvis's end of his career. Like he was almost doing it just to keep, you know, being able to get out of bed almost, you know. And that's the bad part of it. That is the bad part of that whole situation. Is that once it gets to that point, then you know you're at the end of the rope there, you know. And I mean, I reading again, I keep bringing up Chris Lent's book, but again, he really talks about that a lot as well in that, like all the parties that they had, those crazy parties where the roadies had to go in and clean up the hotel rooms before, you know, they left, because they had all kinds of vials everywhere and bottles smashed everywhere. I mean, they were doing it at that point just to keep themselves afloat, you know. I think that they were just not, you know, there wasn't even a question about motivation anymore. It just is a matter of keeping going. It almost like
yeah, they you know, Peter and Ace perhaps needed to use in order to function.
Yeah. And the next, and going in from Dynasty to Unmasked, you have them now. I think it's their contract was bought out or whatever.
There's pressure.
And you know, this last album, you know, actually it sold well, right? It did pretty well, Dynasty. So now Unmasked, their Polygram is bought over whatever 50% of Casablanca.
By Unmasked, they own it all. They bought Bogart out completely. It's 77 that they buy in, so they own it, and they've renegotiated with Kiss, who are their banner, you know, band basically, because everyone else is jumping ship from Polygram.
Yeah, so I think their Polygram is kind of pushing them into keeping with that trend, since the last album actually did pretty well. It's like, well, hey, let's keep Vinny on and keep the same, is try to write more hit songs, You know, you
Yeah,
did it with I Was Married. So then they come out with Unmasked, and it's even more watered down than Dynasty.
yeah. I mean, you brought up a great point because I Was Made for Loving You went number one in a few spots from what I remember reading,
Yes.
and I mean, record labels love that. As soon as they see, hey, it did well and it's a gold single and this and that. We want more of that, and they had every right, I guess, in their eyes to push them to do that because they had just finished giving them one of the biggest contracts at that point, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I'm reading it from Chris's book there. They got like $1 million advance, like for like, I think they got 2 million a record at that point they were getting advanced. But I mean, that's like a huge, amount of money to get back at that time, and for them to turn around and say, listen, we want you guys to write some hit singles here. I mean, that's their reasoning for it. We're giving you all this cash, and we're giving you all this cash because Dynasty, in their eyes, did so well, right? So,
well, not exactly. They're giving them money because of the key man clause.
Because Bogart left, right?
Because Bogart left, Donna Summer sued Casablanca, or more precisely, her management, which was Joyce, and she left the label to go to Geffen. And there were very few acts on Casablanca because they released so much shit. They were just shoveling records out the back door in some senses. Look at the catalog. There's a lot of stuff on there that is just, has not, aged well, isn't that good. That they were doing what we often accuse Gene of doing, the shotgun effect of, just fire the gun and see what sticks to the wall.
Yeah.
So it was kind of that methodology. And I'm going to put a call out right now. Anyone out there who has a copy of the 1980 contract, I would love to see that. I could really use that. I've got their 73, 75, 76, 77 ones. I would love to see what is precisely in there. But because Neil goes and they've got the key man that allows them, once he's out of the picture and bought out, they can go. The new overlords are desperate to keep acts. They're pruning back the roster tremendously, getting rid of all those crap acts that haven't made it. They've lost, their biggest seller. Parliament's run its course by then, and they've got Kiss.
Yeah. Well, no, but I understand. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Village People left the following. They finished with Can't Stop in 80. Did a movie and a soundcheck, but then they left and went to RCA Records. And then they did the whole little Renaissance debacle.
Yeah, but they were distributed still by Casablanca in Japan.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Japan.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I don't know anything about the Village People.
How'd
Sorry.
you know that?
Okay, Mark, back to you.
I was going to say, that's a very good point to bring up. But I'd venture to say, now correct me if I'm wrong, Julian, that if Dynasty hadn't sold well at all, and if I Was Made for Loving You wasn't as good a single as it was, would they have went so hard after Kiss? Even the key man thing, would they have just said, okay, well, great, see ya? Like if they didn't do so hot,
then they wouldn't have had anything left on the label with any viability. Captain and Tennille, come on.
Come on.
Leroy Gomez, Santa Esmeralda, Angel. I mean, Angel was cooked by that point. They never were going to amount to a thing. They hadn't broken anywhere. They had some great albums and some good music, but, Casablanca didn't have anyone else they could fall back on to say, yeah, Kiss, Get Bent, your album, was okay, but it was a success, and it was a perfect album internationally for the band at that time. Was it that successful in America? Well, it sold 1 million copies of the single. So, their second gold single, was it successful? We've heard all sorts of numbers thrown out that it's double platinum, triple platinum. Who the hell knows at this point? No one's going to want that audit to happen. So it's kind of, they're stuck with Kiss, and they're going to make the most of it. So, going back to what you said, do the same thing over again, except Kiss has become a little bit more complacent, a little bit more comfortable. Paul's been playing his acoustic guitar a lot, being lonely in his apartment, and you end up with shit like Shandy, which is, it's a very nice pop tune. It's, You know, when you analyze it on a technical basis, it's absolutely wonderful. But from Kiss, it's no Beth. So Unmasked, is that a kick in the nuts to the Kiss fans? Or were there not that many left at that point?
Maybe to the like I said, the original fans that started maybe with the first few albums and so on. But
did you buy this album?
It wasn't a kick in the nuts for me. I bought it as soon as I saw it. Now, the funny about this one, I always would wait, know the release dates of albums, but for some reason, Unmasked, I didn't even know it was out until I saw it. I go to the record store a lot, and I just go by the Kiss section of albums, and I'd always look, and all of a sudden I thought, oh, wait a minute, what is this? And I picked up Unmasked. And I said, I didn't even know that was out. So I don't know if the promotion of Unmasked was really lacking as compared to Dynasty. I knew Dynasty was coming out because I was there the day it came out. I went to the record store and pulled it out of the darn box before it was even on the shelf. So, Unmasked was different for me. It's like I didn't even know it was out.
Maybe you weren't buying enough copies of 16 magazine.
Yeah. I bought it and I was fine with it. And again, these are, even though the music is toned down on these couple albums, I still love them in their own way. They're good in their own way. Kiss has changed their, shifted gears throughout their career, and but I still love those albums. I'll still listen to them. It's I'm just saying, I love it when they're a little bit harder rocking, but I still like these ones too.
I remember when I first got this album, and it was one of the last ones. It and Dynasty, for some reason, I seem to recall where it came pretty late in my discovery into the back catalog. And when I put it on the first time, I still get it today. I get a little shiver when Is That You comes on, because it's such an optimistic opening to an album. It's a real balls to the wall rock and roll song, and then you go through the album and What Makes the World Go Round,
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow I actually like more than Shandy. It's a really, really well crafted song. I mean, Alex, take over. Run through your tracks.
Well, I remember. I think I mentioned before. My dad was in the Navy overseas, and so he was in the Philippines, so he had some bootleg tapes. And I remember he had this bootleg tape which started with Crazy Nights and Turn On the Night, then it goes into I Was Made for Loving You. But I remember it had Christine 16 and Tomorrow right after each, back to back. And so I thought they were from the same and I knew it wasn't 70s, it felt 80s, so I thought it was from the same stuff. So I was blown away when I realized that Christine 16 came out in 1977, and I was like, okay. But no, I remember picking up, going to Best Buy in Maryland and picking up Unmasked, and I remember I really did enjoy. I like Talk to Me. Talk to Me was one that I really enjoyed quite a bit. That song, Is That You? Except I don't like the whole little intro, that little wow part. That part always kind of I wasn't keen with it. But I didn't mind the tracks, and I definitely love Y'all That I Want. And I remember when I found they did it live, and the Kiss Alive Forever book. And I remember I was on a quest to find a recording of it live because I thought that was such a great song. I will say I love the box set version, the acoustic, more softer, mellow version of the song, but they definitely are great tracks. She's So European was high school. I thought it was kind of a weird, interesting song and stuff. Maybe because growing up in DC, and we would have a lot of European exchange students come to my school, and so I don't know, just kind of I never hated the song. It was different. It was weird. But.
That is just that song. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned it, but it's just so wrong. It's someone trying to be everything that they're not. It's pretentious, and the lyrics are everything that's wrong.
Well, I gotta give you
musically, it's great.
Yeah, I give it funny not to throw about being a LDS Mormon and stuff. And I remember I was 14 when I got it. And I remember the line, "She makes love on a brass bed," and I remember thinking should I be listening to this song? Am I going to get in
go
trouble?
To hell.
So I take it you were cool with the song.
Yeah, it was cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's a relief.
It just made me chuckle though. Like I remember, like the first time, like 14 when I was hearing it and stuff. My eyes were opening up to the world and stuff of high school and seeing things you never saw. Because in middle school you were transitioning, and then like whoa, high school, and she makes love on a brass band and being LDS. It just everything hit the fan.
Another quick thing about Unmasked is I remember when we were listening to it, I had bought it, and my friend who was also a Kiss fan, pretty big, he knew it wasn't Peter Criss playing. He said that's not Peter playing. Where I didn't know. I said, heck, I know. I said, how do you know that? But he knew he wasn't playing on that album. So
you know what though? There's one differently than Dynasty. On this record, they didn't hide it as much. Like on Dynasty, no. I think not that they purposefully hid it, but Anton's drumming was more on Peter's sort of style side. This record, like Unmasked, was absolutely not. I mean, the one song that's the dead giveaway that Peter Criss is not playing is a Torpedo Girl. Like that drum beat in there that he does in there is like Peter Criss would never play a drum beat like that. But I mean, this record is funny for me personally because it was the last Kiss record I bought. And every time I saw this record in the record store, I always kind of looked at it, and and I'll admit it was one of those situations where I looked at the front cover and I was like, oh, I don't know, what is this? Like the album cover threw me off, and I didn't buy it for a long time. And I finally got it, and I listened to it, and I just thought, it was okay. It wasn't anything spectacular, but again, I got that record a long time ago. What actually made me go out and get it was when I started playing with this friend of mine in one of my bands. He had the poster that came inside with the vinyl, that one that comes with it, on his wall. He had it framed, and I was looking at it and go, wow, that's a pretty cool poster. He goes, yeah, it comes with Unmasked. And he's like, it was not a good record, but the poster's cool. So I finally kind of went out and got the record so I can get the poster and stuff like that. And I listened to it, and I was like, it's not bad. I mean, there's obviously the songs that I really like on here. I really like Talk to Me, I think is one of Ace's better songs that he's written. I really love Talk to Me. Naked City is probably one of Gene's better songs he's written. Is That You is one of the better kick-ass opening songs Kiss has done, which is, surprising. And honestly, I think I actually like Tomorrow. I think that's a great song. I mean, the song before, What Makes the World Go Round, is kind of like, that I could do without. But what's on here that's good is really good, I think. But again, I think it's a victim of Vinnie Poncia's sterilization of his production. It doesn't, in this record, doesn't come across to me nearly as New York City-ish as Dynasty did for some reason. Something about this record seems a little bit more, it almost seemed like they weren't trying as hard. If they were trying hard at all on Dynasty, I'm not sure, but they didn't try it as hard as what they were doing on that last record with this one.
Yeah, I think they show a lot more diversity on this album. So I think they are trying from that perspective. I think Vinny's got the hooks in more. I mean, look at all the credits that he gets. You get more keyboards as well, which are not just him. But it's like they're throwing everything at this contract to prove to the overlords that, we're viable, we're worth, what you've just renegotiated with us. So we're going to give you the tender ballad. We're going to give you the power ballad. We're going to, give you the rocker. It becomes a little bit formulaic at that point.
But from the songwriting, I agree with you. They definitely tried. I'm talking about more like from the production, because I think the production is a bit more clear on Dynasty. It's a bit more, I don't know, I like it better than Unmasked. I think the songwriting is better. I agree that Vinnie Poncia probably had more involvement in the songwriting and the structure of the songs. But I think that maybe because of that, he didn't focus as much on the production of it, in my opinion. You don't have to agree with me at all on that, but that's what I just think.
No, production-wise, Dynasty is definitely the better of the two albums that he worked on. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to put Unmasked up for any award. I mean, it's muddy in parts. It's not been polished. It's been, I don't know, watered down in some ways.
I must question, what do you guys think about the song choices they chose for like the Dynasty tour from Dynasty and Unmasked? Because I was disappointed they never did Sure Know Something live, especially with doing a promo video for it.
Yeah, and they released that as a single. So, yeah, why did they not play it? I guess it's the same reason they don't play some other singles that kind of didn't, hit the mark.
Dynasty I get because they had to put in some of the solo stuff. And, what's the solo stuff that survives? I mean, New York Groove.
Move On.
Well, barely. But, everything except New York Groove gets dropped, ultimately. That's the only song that had any longevity attached to it. What else do they play? They've got to play the million-selling single, I Was Made for Loving You. So there was a lot of stuff I would have loved to have heard on bootlegs, since I obviously wasn't a fan back then.
Yeah, and they didn't tour here. I mean, at least for Unmasked, I was hoping that they were going to tour, but that never happened. I mean, they only played that one show introducing Eric Carr at the Ritz or whatever, right?
The Palladium.
Palladium. I mean, sorry, that's the other one. But yeah. So then I saw Eric Carr when he was introduced on that show on Sunday morning. So. Yeah, I was hoping, man, they were going to tour here, but I guess it was just really.
I think that's a really great point, though, because I mean, there again is the influence of the new record label, right? Because I mean, Phonogram being based in the overseas in Europe, they probably wanted to bring Kiss over and really start pushing them over on this side, because I think up until that point, they had been strictly a North American touring band. I mean, they went over once, I think, during Destroyer, right? And then they only went to Japan. Other than that, but they never really did any solid touring in Europe. So they figured that this is a brand new virgin market for them to go in and start playing stuff. And they had Dynasty, which did well over in Europe, right? So they were probably trying to push them over there, and that's why they probably didn't come back to North America till who knows, till Creatures, right?
Yeah, because North America didn't want them at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, 74 to 80. Kiss's idea of touring internationally was essentially going to Canada. Yeah, they went to Japan and did 10 shows in 2 separate tours. So they were not an international band at that point. They'd gone to Europe, and that was 76 is anything but impressive. 1980 they put a much bigger effort. I mean, look at the number of markets that they toured in Germany in particular. I mean, they were up and down the country in England. They were hitting every rinky-dink place in France. So they really made a solid and concerted effort to shift their popularity internationally because they knew they were dead in America. So you've got nothing left at home. You're looking next door. Well, that's across the pond. So Alex has disappeared. He went to check on his Village People collection.
Yeah, I was thinking it was because he listened to She's So European.
He just got the answer that is not acceptable.
It's not acceptable.
All right, so let's get back to where I think we were, and that is kind of we're in Europe now because you've got no life left in America. You're commercially dead, so you're looking for new markets. And Australia was probably the most appealing of the markets. Dynasty had been, a successful album there. So they basically took the show on the road because they had nowhere else to go. What are your thoughts on that, Mark? Because I can't think of anything right now.
Well, I mean, it's actually interesting that Australia took to Kiss so hugely at that point. I mean, it made me wonder about a couple of things. I mean, up until that point, and maybe you have more insight on this, Julian, than I do, but was the Kiss catalog even released in Australia before Unmasked, or was that like the first record that?
No.
Yeah?
No. Australia was the earliest adopter of the catalog, with Astor Records had released, I believe, Hotter Than Hell was their first domestically released album. They had also released singles like Strutter is the first single out there. So they were well keyed in on the band, though it didn't have the popularity quite as elsewhere. But it didn't have the negative connotations like the British, poo-pooed the band, as some, Americans dressed up looking like idiots.
Yeah,
Shandy was a huge hit there.
Massive hit, but
right?
Australia really seemed to lap up the hype.
They were like the Beatles.
Well, not like the Beatles, because the Beatles,
in a way,
the Beatles had, when they went to Australia, had 300,000 show up to greet them, and Kiss had 3,000, if that. At Sydney. So
okay.
Well, I mean, what I was trying to get at with that whole question basically was just that if that wasn't their first record there, then why did that one actually hit? I'm just wondering why Unmasked of all records went so gigantic there. I mean, the reaction that Australia had to them at that point there was like unbelievable. It's like, why didn't that happen with Love Gun, or why didn't that happen with Rock and Roll Over, or Destroyer even, like it just seemed like that's such an odd record.
One word: marketing.
Okay.
A concerted effort to market outside of the U.S. And if you look at the press in Australia during the Unmasked period, they were being fed a line. They would have had you believe that Kiss is the greatest thing, that they were number one in America, and most people didn't have access to the information like we do today. It's at our fingertips that we can fact check or look up something when we're talking about it while we're doing a show. In Australia, there were press reports. They're coming, Kiss, bigger than life. Yeah, they're coming, and I mean this is in June when the tour is announced. So it was manufactured, and I said in something that I wrote, something that I'm writing right now, Malcolm McLaren would have been absolutely flabbergasted and proud of the hype job that was sold the Australians in the 1980 tour, because if you think about it, no one actually made any money out of that tour. The promoter lost money.
Yeah.
And Paul's flying models across the Tasman Sea. I mean, C.K. Lent, again, read his book. Has some great stories about that. It's all manufactured. It's not massive. You get all these stories in the press after the tour. These poor Australian licensees who, made 50,000 coins and only sold 3,000. Or those numbers are not correct, but the effect's the same. That they went bankrupt because they bet everything on the hype, but it didn't exist. Nor did it exist in Europe because, again, like 1976, they're not playing gigantic venues. They're not selling out. They're doing adequately.
Yeah, it was funny because, again, in that book, that's one thing that you brought up that was very interesting. Is like they mentioned in the book that the promoter asked them what did they want at their concerts when they were in Australia, and they said, we want a swimming pool at all the gigs, and the guy provided the swimming pool for them. So no wonder this guy didn't make any money. I mean, he had to do such lofty things just to appease this band. There was no money. Either. There was no. And they said that they never used it at all, right? So, and that just goes to show the abuse of power at that point. I mean, come on, man. Yeah. Instead of wasting it on a pool, you could have, maybe got paid a bit more extra because of it, but whatever. I mean, it's just that was just them flexing their ego, I think, by requesting that.
What's a band supposed to do? The Van Halen brothers. What was it? No brown M&Ms. In their
but that was smart though that no brown M&Ms thing, because I mean, I'm sure you must have read the story about why they did that, right?
Yeah, to see if the promoters are actually reading the right,
paying attention and following the contract.
Yeah, which is brilliant actually, because if they didn't follow a small thing like that, then why would they follow any of the big legal things that they needed, right? So, but it's. I always thought that Australia was kind of interesting because of that, like just the whole reaction to it, and that was something that I always found, in the back of my head, is that if they had all these other records before, Unmasking, like the most unlikely record that would have put them over. But like you said, the hype machine was probably working at its best. They had a big record label pushing them at that point, so they probably had much more in terms of promotion going on for them. And there you go. I mean, and Australia has always been now that place that you can rest assured that if they went there, they have a good attendance still, I think, right?
Okay, just as a fact check, I did look up you know, what were the top 25 singles in Australia in 1979, just to get an idea of the sort of music that was popular. My Sharona is up there. Do You Think I'm Sexy? La Freak.
Disco.
Pop music by M. Heart of Glass, Blondie. Kiss, I Was Made for Loving You. So, YMCA, Alex. Hot Stuff by Donna Summer. Video Killed the Radio Star. Great song.
Wow. Cool.
So, it you know, Kiss's stuff at that time isn't so far off what is popular in Australia. So you kind of get it from that perspective. You know, I hope our Australian brethren aren't offended by what me saying basically that they were sold a line of hype, because it was an event. And living in Australia, I don't think there were a tremendous amount of major international touring acts that were touring down under. And your domestic bands like AC/DC had left.
Yeah.
You know, they were elsewhere at that point, because after 1976, when they signed with the big international labels, they were less and less involved in Australia. Obviously, they never lost their roots completely, but so it's an event.
Yeah.
And for this generation, it is kind of the same thing as the Beatles were in whatever year they went to Australia. So, what was it, 65, I think. So Kiss in 1980 is a major event. It's just not on the same level, but that doesn't mean that in terms of pop culture it's any less important.
Yeah, because I mean, you brought up a really good point about that too, about how at that point Australia never had many bands go there. I think if a memory serves me, maybe Queen went there before them or around that time. But I mean, like you said, it wasn't like they were getting bands all the time going in there to play. So of course, whenever you had a huge act come in there, must have been like, you know, pull out the party hats and go crazy kind of thing, you know, because they were, you know, and even now, like before that tour happened, or I even read about it, I never really heard many things about bands going to Australia. Now it seems like they go, and lots of bands want to go to Australia, but that just seems now more of like a financial thing. They have to sort of, you know, make it feasible for them to go there to play. But everybody seems to always give great reports about playing in Australia. You know what I mean? Whenever you hear a band say we're going to go tour, they're always saying in the back of their mind that they're really hoping to go to Australia, you know?
I guess, and Julian, you had that deal about I know those material about the offered movies or a show, that sort of thing, the Halloween thing, and then there's the ghost thing. And I think it was, you know, Kiss was offered these things. This is obviously after probably Phantom of the Park. And I think it's a good idea that they turned these things down or never did them, because I think it would have taken them even farther down. I mean,
further down from Phantom, huh?
Yes, yeah. I just, you know, in reading some of the stuff about these things, the best part is always going to be them playing, you know, anything, even like in Phantom of the Park. The best part is them playing live on stage. Yeah. You know, if they were going to do any kind of movie back then, they should have just done a full movie on stage live. It would have been the way to go.
Which they basically did for what was it, HBO.
HBO in Japan, right?
Yeah, re-editing that and taking out all the Japanese subtitles and all that. But obviously there was the proposal for Hysteria, you know, the documentary for. And I didn't give you guys that document with the two other treatments that I gave you. Was looking at filming the Australian tour, like starting with Ayers Rock and an Aborigine, or forgive me for not being politically correct. I'm not sure how we refer to Native Australians these days. You know, kind of reacting to the jet landing. So you get a lot of that stuff going into that movie proposal for the Australian tour, which we ultimately see many years later. Then you see this, A Kiss for Halloween. This is 1979. I'll just read a quick line. Here's the thin storyline. Kiss visits the haunted castle as one of many stops on the tour of England. Kiss becomes aware that the townspeople are upset, frightened. they discover that the ghost of Halloween has decided to return to his original home, the castle. Jesus tits.
All right, I mean, you
Ken, you're right. They did a
Scooby-Doo movie, fine. But if you're gonna do it, a live action with Kiss like that, that's not gonna. It's not gonna work.
Yeah, the other script is Behind the Mask of Kiss, which was a working title, and that seemed to get pretty far. I mean, some of the letters and stuff, the back and forth on that was that, you know, Aucoin was at least happy with that idea, or happier, that it was kind of reaching a point where they felt it would be able to go forward. But
you know what, though? That's the one that I thoroughly read last night. I went and I sat down and I got my little Kiss lamp out there and, you know, sat there and I read it thoroughly there. And the first thing that came into my head after I read that top to bottom was it reminded me of one of those Hallmark sort of, you know, season kind of movies that they have, you know, like the two kids, you know, the two little girls, you know, they're dreaming about going to Kiss, and then they, you know, they're seeing them on TV, and all of a sudden they're following the band and they go through this adventure, and then all of a sudden they wake up and realize it's all a big dream, and it's just something that right out of the Hallmark channel. Like, when I read that, I'm like, wow, like if that would have gotten made, that would have just further supported all those people that said that they were turning into a kiddie band, I think, you know. It was interesting to get that much information on it. Thanks, Julian, for that. But, you know, it was such a interesting read in that sense. But in a way, it's one of those things that, again, I have to echo Ken and say that I'm very glad that they didn't do that, because that was really my first impression of that was just from reading it. Could you imagine what it would have been like if they actually filmed it?
Well, I'm just looking at the phrases on the first page, and it's the basic theme of Behind the Mask is a pursuit or chase in which two attractive and wholesome teenage girls. Well, you lost me there, because who wants wholesome?
Exactly.
Oh man. So yeah, I mean, going back, you know, that wouldn't have worked. And you know, just think about, I was you know, reading about these album covers too, and what they toned down the original Dynasty album cover, which they thought about having them in straitjackets, right?
Yeah.
But they thought that was too much. And plus, I think Ted Nugent or someone had an album cover with a straitjacket. But you know, they should have just done it anyway. And then the other one, they really blew it with using the name Unmasked on that album. They could have used it down, you know, for Lick It Up. They could have used it there. It would have been the perfect album title for Lick It Up. They should have used something else. I didn't like the album cover of Unmasked from the standpoint of the storyline. It was colorful. Yeah, it was kind of cool. Oh, yeah, it's a comic book. I like comics and that sort of thing. But you know, it just was kind of lame. And the end of it where, you know, the guy says, "I still think they stink." You know, why?
Yeah, why?
That's just the wrong thing to put on.
I would not put that on my own album if I had an album out. You know,
exactly.
I would say you know, wait a minute. It should have said, wait a minute, these guys rule. And that would have been a better ending than I still think they stink. So
I mean, there's a certain amount of irony or, you know, whatever. You wouldn't see a politician on the road handing out pins saying, "I suck." You know, just not gonna, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You know, you're selling yourself,
even though it may be true.
And it may be true. It is the 50% of the perspective, but. You know, I seem to recall seeing a memo for alternative titles for Unmasked, or it may have been Dynasty. And
it was Dynasty. They were going to call that Asylum.
Well, I saw some other...
And have them in
a list.
Which made it make sense. Okay.
So I can't remember whether it referred to this or to Dynasty. And both of the Unmasked and Dynasty, I think, are better titles than what was on that list. So they really didn't have much of a clue of what the hell to call their albums at this point either, so... It's kind of overbearing desperation, really.
Well, I mean, Dynasty, in a sense, though, I thought was the better cover because it was a bit more simpler, a bit easier to take in when you look at it. Whereas Unmasked, I think the problem with that was it was just too much on there. You know what I mean? Like there was
busy.
Because it was too busy because it was a comic strip. It's like you literally have to go there and look at it and go like, well, what the heck is going on here? Like you want to literally go and kind of read it, but you know, I think Dynasty as a cover worked better I think Unmasked didn't help itself with that cover at all. And it's interesting that you brought up the straitjackets because, you know, us all being vinyl people, they have that one cover that's leaking around there where they have the picture of them where you can kind of still see them wearing the straitjackets underneath there.
Saw that.
So it's interesting that they have that. They were still technically probably wearing it when they were making those pictures, right? So it's interesting.
I think Unmasked is a beautiful cover. I think it's an interesting concept that isn't quite executed. It would have been better as maybe a little mini insert comic.
Yeah. Inside, yeah.
You know, maybe to just use a single panel like they did with the poster, you know, and sometimes, you know, somehow juggle that to be the album cover and use the panels on the inside, you know, whether it's a layout as a gatefold or, you know, a wraparound for an inner dust sleeve or something like that, or even maybe just as an insert little, you know what they're hearkening back to? They're going back to the 78 cartoon, you know, comic books, the Marvel stuff. You know, they're still going for that age groups, you know. So, I mean, we know why it's there, but it doesn't work.
You know, you just made me think of something. If they would have done that cover and had, like you said, a gatefold, and had we get to the point where, okay, they're going to see them unmasked, but the unmasked part is on the inside of the gatefold, and you know, you get people to, oh God, I gotta buy this to see what they are, and then they'll, you know, of course.
Yep.
See, and that right there, there. Yeah, that's a great idea, and that's what Kiss was actually missing at this point. I think they needed people like, you know, you guys and us to think of these kind of ideas, because wouldn't that have been a more alluring and captivating cover to go out and buy, or a record to buy, if you had that kind of a cover? I even liked Julian's idea better of having just the poster as the front cover instead of having the actual cover as an inside for maybe the sleeve or something. Like, that's a much better idea than how they had it. I just think that Kiss at this point, even their people working for them just were running out of ideas or running out of inspiration for stuff, because it just seemed like you guys just thought of this now in like 5-10 minutes, and for them, God knows how long it took for them to come up with these covers that they had, you know?
Yeah, so they got the concepts, but they maybe just didn't get it all put together, you know, just like the album. So I think we're pretty sure that the Behind the Mask of Kiss and the Kiss Halloween special were pretty fortunate that they didn't happen.
Yeah.
And we eventually get Kissteria in 2008, so you know that's kind of better. Poor little Eric Singer goes missing.
Yeah.
What a shame.
Oh my gosh.
So
find the trail of watches and you might find it.
So, and any final thoughts on Unmasked? I mean, you know, or Dynasty? I mean, there's so much that we can talk about with these albums. You know, we can always look at them from different perspectives. And before we wrap up here, do we want to say anything? At 7 a.m. tomorrow, since this show will go out tonight, an announcement. An announcement of what? That is the question.
Will be on the Kiss site. And you noticed, I just noticed today or yesterday, or I mean it was today, they're promoting their Kiss Army package, right, to the new 2016. And usually they do that right before they're going to announce like a tour or something.
Could that be what it...
I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is going to be. I mean, I even saw a couple of things on Facebook and Twitter today, too, where they had a picture of, I think it was Paul's boot from his costume on a stage. And that kind of almost wants to hint at being a tour of some sort. But, I mean, I've always been secretly hoping there's going to be another record. But, I mean, I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon.
Paul, can we have another record, please? Another record.
Kiss conventions.
Yeah, how about Kiss, or even an acoustic tour of theaters?
That'd be interesting.
They've been getting good reviews still.
Yeah, but I've got one thing I want to bring up. What the hell is going on with the band's introduction? Did you see the LA Kiss show, how it was introduced? And have you seen the trailer to the Kiss in Vegas movie?
No.
You wanted the best
the trailer.
Kiss. What happened to the rest of it?
You got the best, you mean?
Yeah, there's no more you got the best on those two things.
Really, eh?
So go and check those and fact check me to see if I'm going deaf or becoming more stupid.
Wow.
Because that was really weird. I mean, I can understand you maybe saving a second for a trailer or a teaser. So, just seems,
Interesting.
just seems odd. But those little memes that are popping up everywhere, I mean, they all point to some live action of some description. You know, they're either on stage, like Paul's boot, like you mentioned, or in the changing room with the costumes hanging. So,
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, and particularly if they come out this way, I've skipped too many shows of late that
I'm going.
I would actually be I'd be interested. I think, depending on whether it falls on a day with soccer.
Wait,
Well,
All right, so let's wrap this up because Alex is not coming back. I've tried and I've tried. Alex, I did try. I'm very trying, as my wife would say. So that's the episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'd like to get your take on this subject. Obviously, come over to the Facebook page or come over to the KissFAQ message board and leave your opinion about the topic that we've talked about today. And give us some ideas for things that you think we should be talking about as well, because, this is by the board, for the board. So, Alex, wherever you are, Ken, Mark, thank you very much for joining me today, and we will see you all in the future. Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final, there are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.